Hello again, Charlotte here. Right, now we're going to work on some sea, some ocean, nice sort of flat sea but with a little bit of spumy surf at the front here. Now as you can see there's a lime green line across the centre of the painting. This is masking tape and I want to have a really nice clean horizon for where the sea meets the sky. And the best way to do that really is with masking tape. This is one of the Scotch ones for painter's tape. I think it's the concrete tape. There'll be a list in the YouTube description. So you can get a good straight line of horizon with the water. And I would always recommend measuring it, because you can often think that something's straight, and even if it's out, a few millimeters, or it might be more than you think, especially if the line of your paint underneath where you've done your sky is at quite an angle. It's really deceptive. It's really hard to tell when you've got a very horizontal line. So I'd always measure it from the bottom, and remember that it's this bottom edge of the tape which is going to create the horizon. I have had occasions where people have put the tape too low, and then of course you've got this gap of where the sky is. So you want to make sure that you're dealing with this bottom edge, and you put the tape on nice and firmly. Make sure it's really sort of put into the canvas with your fingernail or with the edge of your brush, so you've got a good firm edge there, especially if you're going to be using quite a lot of paint. Now the first thing I want to do, if I'm thinking about the order of the painting, so this is going to be a nice seascape. We've obviously done the sky first. You're always working from background forward. All my students know this, don't you? So you're doing the sky, and then you're thinking of well, what's next in the layering. Now if I want to have a bit of sandy beach here, then I would need to put in the beach first, because of course the water comes over the top of the sand. So I want to make sure that I've done the edge of the beach. So I'm using the primary colours from the set that I normally have in class. Again, details are available for those, and I'm just going to mix up a nice sort of light peachy sort of yellow tone to have a lovely warm sand. So I'm just taking a touch of the red, a little bit of yellow there, lots of white, and straight away I get that gorgeous peach, which is very similar to the tone in one of the sky demonstrations I did. And I'm painting that on. Of course you can see that the red's coming through from the end of my brush. Never a problem. You can just mix pigments, you can mix the white directly onto your canvas. You don't have to do it all on a palette. In fact, sometimes, as with the sky, it's easier to paint directly onto the canvas and manipulate all of the colours directly live, as it were, while you've got all that thick paint on there. I don't want it to be too pink, although a lot of the New Zealand sands are quite pink. Just adding a little bit more yellow warmth there, because I know as it dries the pink is going to come out quite strongly. Now of course I can change this colour as I go along, but I want to make sure that I've got a sandy edge there before I start painting on the water. Now if there's a slightly darker edge at the top, which I've left, that little bit of pink coming through, that's actually a great asset, because as you have the surf just coming onto the beach, there's always a little bit of shadow just underneath the surf, so that's really going to help us. Right, now I'll put that palette to one side. Okay, now in advance, before starting this, you want to make sure that you've got a little bit of light green mixed up. So I'm just using the phthalo blue, a bit of the warm yellow, and lots of white. I'm not adding red into this mix because I know that the red and the blue can create lovely deep watercolours, but actually I want to work from a palette of blue through the greens for very shallow water. So I'm thinking about nice sort of warm, slightly tropical waters, definitely like the New Zealand waters here. And I don't want to have any red mixing in with the green, because of course red and green starts to make brown tones, and I don't want to have a really muddy water. So I'm going to start directly with blue on here. Now for the sky, of course, there was white that I painted on the canvas first to create that moistured layer. But because all of these colours are going to be a little bit darker, I'm not going to put the white on first. You certainly can, but instead I'm going to use the blue, which will create quite a good layer at the back. So I'm using a nice big brush again, using a nice big flat brush. Now this is quite important. Start your first line of the water underneath the masking tape, okay? Because if you press the paint too hard, it's going to force it underneath the tape. So I would always start just a little bit lower and then stroke down over the edge of the masking tape, which just helps to create a little bit of a seal there. Just getting a little bit, stroking it down, just to make sure that I'm not shoving the paint underneath, and then I can go back and forth. I want to make sure that that area at the back is a really good, crisp line. Now you'll notice straight away how much more translucent the blue is when it goes on its own. So you might find that you need to do a couple of layers of the sea if the water is, the way you're applying it, ends up being too translucent. One of the reasons for that is as soon as you add white into acrylic, it starts to become much more opaque. That's why doing this technique for the sky is particularly helpful, because it can be quite difficult going back and forth over the sky, getting that soft blend time and time again, and just doing it once with really thick paint. The white creates a great covering so you don't get gaps in the sky with canvas showing through. Now, I really don't recommend putting a straight out of the tub colour straight on a canvas normally, because they can look really out of a jar. But this is just a great way to start by putting on a nice even covering. I don't want this blue to go too far down into my watery area, because the pigment in this blue is incredibly powerful, and as soon as I add any other colours here, they're going to be really affected by that dark blue. So I'm just going to do a good band of the pure blue, and this is where actually adding in a little bit of the pure yellow, just to start seeing. This of course creates greens. Now you'll definitely have areas within your water which varies in light and dark as the waves are coming in. I'm going to add in quite a lot more yellow there, just mixing into the blue, which gives it additional depth, and it also takes away that pure blue look. Now over the top of that, more blue. So I'm mixing the colours directly on the canvas rather than mixing them on my palette and then trying to apply them on here. So this is just a more efficient way of doing the layering and being able to see the colours as they change in context. Now really important again to make sure that you're going right off the canvas. If I stop a little bit early, you see how I get these marks where the brush lifts off the canvas. So continue as if the canvas goes on for another few centimetres. Now another thing you might notice is that I'm going in very, very horizontal lines. So we're going to do a relatively still sea, and I think the best way to explain this is that, as you know, water is relatively flat because it's stuck to the earth with gravity. So all of the lines within the water that you create, all of the waves, they need to follow that horizontal plane. So it is in fact a grounded area, a body of water. Even though there might be variation in the surface of the waves, the water itself lies flat on top of the earth. So any of the other elements that we have coming into the picture, maybe the clouds are at an angle, the beach of course is also very flat, it's flat on the earth. Even if there are hills or dunes, it's still sort of stuck down. So I want to make sure that my brush strokes are emulating that, and that helps to create the whole sense of direction and plane, which can make a painting look even more realistic. So I'm just adding a little bit more blue onto here. So there's quite a variation. This is now becoming a deep kind of ultramarine-y colour. Oh, with a little drop of yellow just spilling off there. Deep ultramarine, and ultramarine is very much a rich greenish blue. But it's just so easy to control when you've got your own primary colours. So I just put those on. If you have an ultramarine blue that you particularly like using for water, then of course that's fine to use. This is just showing you an alternative, and for all my regular students, this is what the colours you'll be using. Now I'm going to take some pure white, and this is going to completely change the way the water looks. Just so adding in those lines of white straight away, it brings out the tones of the water, and doesn't that just look gorgeous? So again, I'm just keeping the brush going either with the whole flat of it covering a large area, or you can turn it sideways to get the fine line of it. And I don't want to take too much light right to the edge of the horizon, because in this picture I want the horizon to be dark. But isn't that just the most beautiful, gorgeous soft blend? Right, now coming down here, I'm going to, this is the space where I start using a little bit more white. Because of all of the blue that's in my brush, I don't even need to pick up any additional pigment. I'm just going to be taking white. Let's absorb that little bit of yellow that dropped onto the canvas. And can you see how the horizontal lines, now if I vary those, you see how that creates a very different understanding of what's happening with the plane of the water. It makes for a very rolling wave, but it also totally changes our understanding of what's happening with the surface of the water. I mean, if you like those shapes, go for it. They look beautiful, don't they? But I want to make sure this is relatively realistic looking, and for that I need to have flat lines going across the water. Now once you've got a good covering on there, and even that is just so gorgeous with the way that you have the dark lines at the back getting lighter and lighter in such, I'm just using 2 colours in white. I mean, very, very simple. And that, just having that little dot of yellow means I don't even have to actually add in any additional green tones there. But what I will do, since I made up a bit of that light green earlier, again, I'm going to use the same brush. I'm just getting lots of paint on there now. And I'm going to create a nice thick line of white just coming along. So I'm still using this huge brush and pushing it in just to really digging the brush in, which mixes the paint in a different way. And now I start to move that back up through the water. Now remember your scale. So as water recedes away from you, the lines of the waves would start to look closer together. And just picking up some of the blue from further back and bringing it into the area at the front, mixing with all that white. Now we still haven't quite met the edge of the beach yet, have we? The edge of the sand. And that's just fine. And remember to keep an eye on the edges of your painting there. And what you'll find is you're starting to get different levels of tone, which can almost become too similar. Now, if you find that your brush just becomes really thick with paint and you're no longer able to get a variety of colours, just give it a good dab off. Maybe pick up some more of the pure blue, and I use that, bring that back in just to alter the balance here again. And just back and forth like this, you naturally, just with this motion, you're creating the sense of the waves, the flat lines of the water going all the way across the picture. And this is where you can alter the colour to suit the palette that you like, the tones of the water that you're looking at. All right. You see how those lines just start to give us a real sense of scale. Now I'm going to add a little bit more darkness back through this second half, the top half. I'm just going to swap my brush. So 1 second, I managed to not bring another brush with me. Always be prepared. No, I didn't bring another brush. That's terrible. we go. Right, give it a good shake off. I don't want to be adding any extra water. And just as with all the other tutorials, I do encourage you to try and put the pure acrylic on, not to water it down, because you want to be able to celebrate the qualities of the acrylic. So here I've just taken some more of the yellow with the blue, and just to bring that darker tone back through, and just following that seesaw motion. You can get into a really nice rhythm doing this. Now see, I'm not going too quickly, just back and forth, trying to make sure that I can even out those lines if they start to become a little bit wobbly, just to have a lovely smooth blend. And there we have just a gorgeous area of blended sea, where you're starting to see the lovely lines of the water. And I'm going to add at the front here a lot of bright white. Now there's a really easy way to add this, and I'm just going to get some more white onto my palette here. I'm using flat brush that I used for the beach. So taking quite a big quantity, and you can even just lay it on like this, lay it on nice, and you should be able to tell from the light source from the right hand side. You should be able to see a little bit of shadow against the paint, which is showing how thick and 3D that is. See how I'm just applying it, creating that sort of rolling motion from the edge. Even if you make little actual roll shapes like that, little curls as the water's coming in, you know, you get that lovely bit of foam coming all the way across. And maybe just taking a few of those lighter colours, bringing that back in, mixing in some of the white. You can use any of these colours to still get gorgeous variations in any of the areas of the foam or the water. And that's another great advantage of using so limited a palette of colours initially. You can obviously create as many colours as you want to from limited primary paints, but just having just a few means that anytime you're mixing a new tone, if they're all going to be really complementary, none of them are going to really stand out. It's not like you're adding a different kind of blue in. So getting a little foamy edge there, but I don't want it to look too stormy, like it's crashing in. And of course at this stage, you know, if I want to just add a few little extra lines, you know, sometimes it's always easier to draw a confident line if you press quite hard. You know, when you're approaching the painting, you go, oh no, what's my line going to look like? Just commit and draw that line with the brush. Nice, just sort of digging in. These will help to give that sense of the rolling foam, and just the little zigzag effect that the brush creates as it drags along in the thick paint makes lovely naturalistic impression. I'm just going to do a few back here, just a couple, just to keeping that scale in mind. If you find that you're getting some wobbly lines, doesn't matter, you can always just keep painting. So now we're getting a lot of interesting detail in the foreground there, and then that deep sense of change of tone as the water gets further away. Remember your lines. If you do wave motion which goes further back, remember your lines need to get closer and closer as the water recedes. They appear to be closer together, of course. Okay. Now, as you can see, this is all done wet paint, all done wet, and you can keep going with the wet paint for as long as you want to. And you might find that when it's dried, it looks a little bit different because of course the acrylic paint dries slightly darker. So when it's dried, you might feel that there are some areas you want to go over, maybe a few bits which don't quite fit in or which you hadn't noticed the first time round. But that starts to so that fits in beautifully, doesn't it? With the soft sky, just that subtle bit of hazy cloud, the nice little rolling edge of foam there. Now, if I want to add in a slightly darker line, just a slightly darker line under the surf, green paintbrush, I think I might need to wash that. So, preparation. I was so enthusiastic about doing this, I forgot to get a couple of clean brushes, didn't I? Now, just to add in a slightly darker edge under the foam there, of course you can wait till this is dried, but just going back to my peachy tone, just adding a little bit of blue in there, creating the same sort of purple I used for the clouds, but adding in then a little bit of the peach tone from the beach. So I'm getting a nice warm pinky colour, which will be a little bit like the wet sand. And then just support yourself on your finger if you need to. Just put in a few little bits of that, just tucking up underneath the surf. Now you don't want to have a line which goes all the way exactly the same under each area of white foam. This is creating a bit of shadow, so it's not going to be, definitely not going to look like an outline. You don't want it to look like an outline. Just a few areas where the foam might be moving in a slightly different way or a little bit thicker. So you see how that's just creating a little bit more sense of shading, of shadow, of realism, just as the water is coming in over the beach there. Very, very lovely, quick and easy way to get gorgeous water impression. Now, I feel like that could work extremely well for us for this painting. I'm also going to demonstrate one where we're adding palette knife over the top. So if you've enjoyed this process, then do watch the palette knife video. Now, this is the most exciting bit about it, of course, like birthday. Now, I'm just trying to find the edge of the masking tape. Right. Now, when you're removing the masking tape, especially when it's still on a wet painting, you need to be quite confident about pulling the tape forward. So you're pulling it down over the edge of the water, but still out at the same time. I'm afraid that this is going to fall off the easel with my enthusiastic pulling. Right, there we go. Ah, just off the edge. And look at that. Lovely crisp horizon line. We've got a really, really, really nice blend, and anything that stands out to my eye later on I can add in some different colours when it's dry, or I can just leave it like that, and I've got that gorgeous blend of all of those lovely watercolours, that sense of the flow of the waves, and it fits in perfectly with the sky. And we can add all sorts of additional elements to this to make it an even more interesting landscape. How exciting. Now it's your turn. Go and have some fun. See ya!